Hello and welcome to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at University Bookstore is author Julia Quinn. Julia, hi. Thank you for coming by this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful.
I want to talk about how you became who you are, which is one of the best loved romance writers of our time. Were you a reader as a child?
Yes, I was a huge reader. We didn't have tons of money. My parents were divorced. I lived with my mom, and money was always tight. And you know, there were no big bookstores in every town also. So for me, the place was the library. And I was what the school called a walker. And so I would walk home, and the library was on the way home. And so I would stop there almost, I don't know, I'd say maybe 2-3 times a week. I would stop in the library. And, you know, now you think, you know, 6-7 years old, walking home alone.
Right.
But that's what I did. And I would go to the library, and I went through all of the Carolyn Haywood books, B is for Betsy, Betsy's Little Star, did all that, graduated eventually to, well, I'm sure there was something between B is for Betsy and Victoria Holt, but I did that. And I just always read. When I was 13, I was spending the summer with my dad in California, and I was reading a teen romance type thing, you know, maybe Sweet Valley High or something like that. And my dad, who can be a little bit of a literary snob, although he loves my books, reads them all, but can, you know, just started giving me a really hard time. He said, no. And I said, Dad, I'm not going to read, you know, Tolstoy on vacation or something. I'm sure I didn't say Tolstoy, and he said, if you can give me one good reason why you should be reading those books, then go right ahead. So I said, vocabulary. You know, vocabulary words. It's all we get. That's why people read. They learn new words. And he said, okay, can you find me one word in any of these books you don't already know? And I could not. So then I said, well, I'm doing research because I'm going to write a book. And he said, great. He said, you can have my computer tonight. And this was, I think, 1983, so not many people had a computer. And he had, I believe it was an Osborne, and the screen was about that big, black with, you know, sort of those blinking green letters like War Games or something. And he sat me down in front of the computer, and he said, I'll see you when I see you. So I sat there, and I wrote 2 chapters of a book. And he said later he didn't expect me to come back immediately, because I was always the kid who, you know, if you punished me, go to your room, I'd bring a book, and they wouldn't see me for 3 hours. And so he wasn't expecting that, but he didn't think he'd have to come in to haul me out. And I ended up, over the course of that summer and the next summer, writing a teenage romance novel. And then I found there was this competition run by, there was a line of teen romances at the time, I can't remember. And so I crafted, I did lots of research on what you put in a letter to the publisher, a pitch letter, and I said, you know, I am 16 years old or 15 or however old I was at the time, and so I feel that this is more authentic and blah, 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 blah. I was rejected so fast. I mean, in an industry known for moving at the speed of sludge, it was less than a week when my manuscript came back in my self-addressed stamped envelope with a rejection letter. And I knew instantly they hadn't read it. They'd taken one look at the letter and said, she's a teenager, what can she do?
Was it different than the Beverly Cleary 15, you know, those?
Yeah, you know, it was just a true, there was it's killing me that I can't remember. There's a line of books that it's kind of like one notch more involved, I guess, than Sweet Valley High. But it was true. It was just like a romance in high school.
A cheerleader and football player and
because
that sort of thing.
Can't do a cartwell, she wasn't a cheerleader. It was, you know, the girl in the drama club.
Right.
But yes, it was very, and nowadays, honestly, I've read it again. What's really interesting is that you can totally tell it's me.
Why do you think there isn't a market for those teen books that are one step beyond the 15s or Going on 16 by Betty Cavanagh or those? Do you think because those kids are reading up?
Well, I think kids always read up. I mean, I was reading these books when I was 12. I mean, what, 12-year-olds read about 15-year-olds and 15-year-olds read about 30-year-olds. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I think actually there's just such a wealth of children's literature right now. I mean, there were great books when I was a kid too, but I think they're just more now.
Right.
And for whatever reason, you know, the Sweet Valley High type books, or you know, the line of little romances that I was reading has been, you know, now there's Poison Apple and stuff like that.
Right.
But I do have to say that I'm convinced that this book got me into college, because I, even though it didn't get published, when I was writing up my application to college, there was a question. It said, list, you know, it was either 5 or 10 books that have had the most effect on you, or choose one book and write about it. And so I thought, well, of course they're expecting everybody to do the hard one and choose one book.
Tolstoy.
So I chose the book I wrote, and I wrote a little essay about the book that I wrote. And I'm convinced it was the only thing that made me different,
stand out
in any way from everyone else applying.
So you clearly had that stick-to-itiveness and that kind of drive to get it finished.
I must have.
Yeah, right.
But I know I didn't work on it at all during the school year. I remember just
the 2 summers.
It was a summer thing, and again, when I started my first adult novel, I started the summer before my senior year of college, and I think I wrote about 4 chapters, and then the next year, I didn't work on it at all. And it wasn't a conscious decision. It just
like fell by the wayside with
everything
everything
and it was
else.
Just so hard. And then when I finished college, I picked it back up and got working again.
Did you always want to write romances?
I never sat down and started writing the great American novel. I sat down and started writing a romance because that's what I liked and they were fun, and I thought, okay. And you know, since then, I kind of realized that's where my talent lies in a big way, and I enjoy it. So
I was struck by Victoria Holt, who I read to, and actually my daughter in college at Harvard did a paper comparing her favorite Victoria Holt novel to some assignment that she had, and I'm convinced that's the only person who ever mentioned Victoria Holt in an English class or a Russian history class. I'm not even sure what it was or how she fitted in.
Well, I can tell you she was mentioned in a sociology class at Harvard, because I was in that class. Yes.
Really?
I took a sociology class my junior year, and I remember somehow it was one of those classes that was like 2 hours on one Tuesday or something like that. And one Tuesday we were discussing romance novels, and we were reading, I think, from that Janice Radway book, which is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's terrible and dated. Maybe it wasn't terrible when it came out, but it's very dated now, and I think not at all relevant to any of today's writing, and yet it still gets quoted because there aren't that many academic works. But it was funny, you could spot instantly which were the women in the class who actually did read romance novels, because we got very defensive and very supportive, and you know, there were other people, nobody was kind of mean, but they were kind of like, what are these things? You know?
But how come we're not getting so many of those suspense romance?
Gothics, really?
Well, but more I guess Victoria Holt is Gothic. I was thinking also of Mary Stuart. That whole sort of part of the romance world.
No, I think it's there.
Do you?
Yeah, I think it's just marketed in a different way because it's set, you know, in contemporary times are different, you know, so it's got the black cover and maybe the woman is a cop, and, you know, I think it's there. I think it just looks different.
I just always loved the Mary Stuart going Corfu or, you know, at Greece and
the exotics,
all that kind of exotic. And now it's much more, the supernatural is going to be.
There is a lot of that.
Yes.
Well, I guess, you know, in many ways that's exotic. So maybe that's what people are
absolutely
reading instead. I don't write for Harlequin, but I have lots and lots of friends who do, and they have many, many different series. And one of them is called Harlequin Presents, which I think is like worldwide their best-selling one. And that one is, in many ways, can be very old school when, you know, the total alpha man, you know, he's a billionaire or whatever. But that one actually does have a lot of exotic locales. It seems like there are a lot of Greek heroes or Italian heroes or something like that. So there are still some places to find that.
What always strikes me about your books is I always imagine, as hard as it is to write a book, that you have great fun writing them, in the sense that you love your characters.
I do love my characters. I would say I have great fun writing parts of them. I have really great fun writing the last bit.
Just before Christmas and Hanukkah.
When I started writing, I realized that the books that I was gravitating to, and the reason, and I had stopped reading romance for a few years. I mean, not out of any conscious decision, it just kind of happened. And then I must have picked up a book and suddenly got sucked back in, and I realized that the authors that I would go to the bookstore to try to find a book from were the ones who had some humor in their books. I think perhaps I said, I'm going to write a book that has humor in it, but at the same time, it comes natural to me. I try to write a book that's dark and with a hero who's, mean at first or whatever. And
Glowery.
He always turns out to be a nice guy. And, maybe I married a nice guy, never was interested in the bad boys. So my people, they're funny. They can say stupid things, and they don't always speak in complete sentences, but we don't either. And I don't think I could write a book that wasn't funny in some respect.
You're writing books that you would like to read, even apart from you being the author.
Yes. I mean, when I look into other genres that I read, for example, I only read mysteries that are funny. I mean, I love reading the Amelia Peabody mysteries, and that's because the narrator is just so amazingly funny. Janet Ivanovich, I remember actually waking my husband up in bed because I was laughing so hard, the bed was shaking. I mean, they're funny, and I'm not that interested in reading about murder and stuff like that if there isn't something else. I mean, that's just depressing. I don't want to read that.
And do you think that that's one of the things that makes the romances so popular among readers is that, while they may not be, slap your knee, laugh aloud funny, but you have a sense that they're not going to end on a bad note.
Well, they won't. I mean, that's kind of the definition of a romance novel as opposed to, a novel with romance in it or a romantic novel. I mean, and I'm talking in a publishing term. I'm not, if you were in publishing and you want to publish a romance novel, it has to have a happy ending. Right. And how you get from the beginning to that point is wide open, which is why I always tell people, no, there isn't a formula. But there are certain parameters, and that's the big one. And I've had people scoff and be like, well, how can you write a book with such, and I said, well, if you write a mystery, you have to solve it. I mean, just think how angry you'd be if you're reading an Agatha Christie, and at the end, Poirot goes, well, that's a stumper, So yeah, no, it has to end happily, and I think that is one of the reasons why so many women, and some men, but mostly women, do like reading romance novels, is because they know, even if at some point they'll be, they catch their breath and there's a black moment, they know they're going to get a happy ending.
I've heard people talk about the empowerment, women's empowerment in the romance field. That these are really about women succeeding and being strong.
It's interesting because in the books I write, they're set in the early 1800s.
Right.
And so the opportunities for women were very much limited. And so to be historically accurate, in many of my books, the ambition of the woman is to get married and have children, which, in some ways seems very, very retro. But I just present that in a way that she still has control over it. In my books, at least, you're not going to find a heroine who people walk all over. Or if they walk all over her at the beginning, they're not going to be doing it at the end.
A number of your books are about the Bridgertons. So where did the Bridgertons come from?
The Bridgertons are an 8-book series. I did not intend to write an 8-book series. I was just starting this novel called, it had no name at the beginning, but it ended up being called The Duke and I after, I believe, somebody suggested Daphne's Bad Air Day, H-E-I-R, which actually would have...
That would have been great.
It would have fit the book really well. I have to say at one point, my publishing house said, we want to name it The Duke's One Desire. And I was just like, no, thank you, because that's just not me. But anyway, I was writing this book, and I don't know why I gave the heroine 7 brothers and sisters, but I did. And what happened was, I was in that spot of the book at the beginning where you want to do what writers call an info dump, which is basically where, because okay, well, there's all this backstory. The heroine has 7 brothers and sisters, and they live here, and blah, 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 and I need to, tell everybody all this stuff. And I teach a workshop on writing dialogue frequently, And one of the things I say is, when you have one of these info dumps, don't do it in, dialogue, because you're never going to have two sisters talking to each other going, oh, remember when Mom and Dad died in that plane crash and we had to go, So I had a lot of info to dump, and I was trying to figure out how to do it, and somehow I put it in a gossip column, which I opened the chapter with, and then that kind of led into the heroine and her mother talking about the gossip column. And this just kind of took on a life of its own. The gossip column was so much fun. And then at the end of the book, I didn't reveal who the gossip columnist was, which was something I don't think had been done in romance at the time, or if it was, I didn't know about it.
You weren't familiar with it.
Because the thing about romance is that it ends up very neatly. You have your love story, you have your happily ever after. But I left this thing hanging here at the end, and it was actually really funny because the book was reviewed mostly very favorably, but a few people would say things like, I don't like the book, but I have to get the next one because I want to find out who that is. But so that went on, and my initial plan to write 3 books ended up being 8 because it just kind of took off. And my publishing house said, you do realize, you made 8 siblings, you need to write about all of them. And so I did. And what was really fascinating about it was how invested readers became in this family. And I think it was in many ways because they were not actually a dysfunctional family. They were actually a very functional family, and they cared about each other, and they certainly bickered and teased and got angry with each other. But, nobody was beating anyone. There were no deep, dark secrets. The father had died when they were young, but they were kind of normal. Mm-hmm. As I was writing them, I would get emails from readers, and this may be why I no longer have an email link on my website, but just I couldn't keep up with it. But they said, well, what happened to so-and-so? What were in those letters? And did she ever have kids? And did she find those diamonds? And blah, blah. And I don't know, and readers didn't believe me, but I'd say, look, when I finish writing, unless I have to bring those characters back as secondary characters in another book, I don't actually think about what happens to them afterwards. And they were like aghast. And they said, but you have to know if Francesca had babies. And so I got the idea of writing what I call the second epilogue, which was a short story, 30, 35 pages long, set sometime after the end of the book. I had to call it a second epilogue because most of my books have epilogues. And I pitched the idea to my publishing house, and they didn't really get it at first. And so I thought, I'm going to have to actually write one. And it was kind of funny because I hadn't had to write something before selling it in quite some time by then because they knew I could write a book. So I wrote one, and I gave it to them, and they said, well, it's really entertaining, but there's no story here, and I said, well, it's a continuation. It's not meant to hook a new reader. Right. It's not a marketing thing. It's kind of like a bonus. And so eventually we got to the point where I said, you know what, don't worry about it. I'll publish these myself. And 3 days later, no, we can do that. We can do that. And this was before anybody there were no Kindles, there were no e-readers. This was 2005, 6 maybe. And so I had the very first 2 original ebooks published by HarperCollins. And it was very interesting. It was difficult. Some readers thought this was fabulous. Some readers were infuriated that I was charging money for it. They'd say, well, that author over there is putting short stories on her website for free. And I said, well, that author can maybe write a lot faster than I can. I don't know. But they were available just as ebooks at first, and I had always wanted to have them come out in a collection. And so now that I've finally finished up, I'm really excited that they are being published in a print collection called the Bridgerton's
Happily Ever After.
And that's all 8 of them, plus a bonus story about the mother, who, over the course of writing 8 novels, became, I think, my favorite character, because she was the only one who was in all the books. I don't trot out every single character in the series. I only bring them back if there's a reason for them to be there, and there was always a reason for her. And she just became this incredible, wise, and interesting woman. So there's a novella also for her. And so this is coming out early April, and I'm just really, really excited to have them finally all in one spot and in print, because I do have a lot of readers who have waited. I have some who didn't have e-readers. Well, when it started out, people would just download them and read them on their computer. Right. It's been a long journey for these stories, so it's very exciting to have them out. And
so do you feel that now you're done with the Bridgertons? And going to move on to some...
Well, I have written several books since I finished the Bridgertons,
Right.
and I do remember.
But you wrote these. I mean, these
These
stories
Bridgertons.
are
Yes.
right. So they were in your head somehow still.
Well, yeah, and the series that I'm working on now, the Smythe Smiths, are in the same world as the Bridgertons, and so you see them floating through. And one thing I love to do for my readers is drop names of other characters I've written as just little treats, and they're not important to the story in any way. If I have something where I have to have my characters go to a ball, I can say, well, it's hosted by so-and-so, and then and so-and-so never appears, but my readers can go, oh, I know that person, that was in this book. And it's a fun thing. So the Bridgertons have been around. I'm sure we haven't seen the end of them. I mean, eventually I'll either go back or forward in time, whatever.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting, the first books I wrote after them, because I hadn't created a whole new world in so long. It was almost a little disconcerting.
Right. As a reader, I have to say I love meeting up with characters that I've read about and having them just sort of, to bring back the pleasure of, oh, I remember, wasn't that a good book? Or, oh, I remember when they got married, or, all of that kind of thing.
You have to be careful, though. I have messed up in a big way.
I'm sure your readers tell you.
I had this one mistake in a book. It was in Just Like Heaven, which was the first Smythe Smith book. And the mistake is one that only somebody who had read my previous books would know. It has absolutely nothing to do with the book they're reading.
Hand.
It's just in the beginning of the book, I mentioned a character, and I didn't even mention him by name, but it implied that somebody was married to someone. And at the end, that character was there and he was single. I didn't catch it. My sister didn't catch it. My editor didn't catch it. My copy editor didn't catch it. I heard from readers 3 hours after the book went on sale.
Yeah, see, I think that people really care. I mean, they care about those characters, and in some ways those characters are so real to them. It would be like giving a false background to somebody that they knew.
When readers point this out to me, they're always very, very nice about it.
So there's no sense of gotcha.
Well, there are readers who might want to gotcha on something, but that would be like a historical thing. Somebody who cares enough about the characters to actually have noticed that isn't going to want to gotcha me. So they're so nice about it. And, the book's been out for a couple of years, and so they'll say, I'm not sure if you're aware. You'll be like, oh, I know. I know. Don't worry.
my sense of the romance writers community is that it's very supportive.
It is. Honestly, I don't know if I could have been a writer in the age before the internet, because it is so isolating. And I need someone to talk to about it at times. And it's nice to have people who understand what the heck you're talking about.
And I know your sister is like a first reader of your books.
Yes.
And how much do you plot in advance? I mean, within those parameters.
It starts out really as a character study. For me to write a good novel, I need to know who the characters are. And so I will write, usually the outline is about 12 to 15 single-space pages, and I have no idea why I single-space them, but I do. And it always starts with the character background. And I'll put things in there that never show up in the book. This is what happened in this person's childhood. So it's not just, oh, she's stubborn, his favorite color is green, whatever. There's stuff, so about character motivation. And it may not ever be in the book, but if I know it, I can create a more well-rounded, realistic character. And so I go through some of that, and then I start sort of roughly outlining what will happen in the book. And I have the big points, and then there will be little things that pop up as I'm writing it. And you do sometimes get off course, but I guess one thing about knowing there's going to be a happily ever after is that you never get too far off course. But things that happen will surprise you. I mean, I write a lot of dialogue in my book, and that, for me, that's the most fun to write, because if one person says something, it becomes clear what the response is, and sometimes that will take you off in a direction that you hadn't really expected.
One of the newest books is The Lady Most Willing. And you wrote that with 3 romance writers, Eloisa James, Connie Brockway, and you contributed to this. Did you all have conversations about it beforehand, as you were writing?
One thing that I've discovered for me, in order to keep writing fresh, because I don't really want to change what I write, is to change the how. So it's nice for me. That's why, you know, the second epilogues were so interesting for me. I wrote one in the first person, which I don't normally do, and it's a different story arc. You know, it's not boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. I mean, they're already married and love each other. So what?
Right.
So things like that. But she said, but you know, the problem with novellas is that everybody complains they're too short, and then they get it and they only read 2 of the stories because they only want 2 of the authors. And I had done these books several years back based on Lady Whistledown, who was the gossip columnist in the stories, with 3 other authors. And actually, it wasn't even my idea. I thought it was a lot of kind of ballsy of them to suggest it, but it was great. And those stories happened concurrently. And so we were all in a lot of touch to make sure things work and it intertwined, and if one character appeared here, that sort of thing. And it was, I enjoyed it a lot. But we decided instead of doing that, instead of doing sort of a horizontal integration, we'd go vertically and come up with an overarching story with sort of 3 subparts to it. And so that you do need to read it in order, and you need to read the whole thing. And we invited Connie Brockway to join us, because, well, she's our friend, but also because of our friends, she just had a writing style that really meshes well. We weren't trying to make it seem as if it was necessarily one author, but it did need to be people who complement each other.
Sounded alike, right.
Yeah, we had to complement each other. And so what we did was we met up. We actually went to New Orleans because it's the middle of the country. We had one author in Seattle, one in New York, and one in Minneapolis. So we went to New Orleans, and we had the basic plot, but we hashed out, okay, this is what's going on. Let's figure out who the characters are. And we each said, okay, I'll take that one, I'll take that one. And we got the opening written, and we got the ending written.
Wow.
And then we each wrote our part, and we would have to send things back and forth, because if I have, well, in both collections, I ended up writing the first story, so I ended up really introducing all the characters, which I kind of enjoy doing, but I need to make sure I'm not messing something up for someone else.
That's going to come along afterwards.
Yeah, and so, I'd have things, and Connie would say, oh, no, he falls in love with her instantly, so he can't, he has to be thunderstruck or something right here. Okay, change it out. And it's a lot of fun, actually, and I'm sure we'll do another one. And I've been informed it's my turn to come up with the plot, because Eloisa did the first one and Connie did the second one. And I was kind of irritated because the second one's in Scotland, and I said, well, of course we're going to go to Edinburgh to do our plotting, and they said no. So I think the next one may be somewhere on the high seas, which might, involve a tropical get-together in some manner.
Or a trip to India. I think that would be fun to have it set on a ship at that time period.
Oh.
That's
I like that.
I love that whole period and doing that kind of thing at the height of the Raj.
Oh yeah, no.
Would be just so great.
No, I've been to India. I'm like, ooh, I could go back.
Right.
Deducted on my taxes.
Julia, our time unfortunately is up.
Oh,
do you believe that?
No,
it just
this was
flew
so much fun.
by. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Thank you.